You have a seat on the Finance Committee. I know you pay attention to the issues of tariffs closely. The president said in his remarks last night, in addition to outlining the justification for tariffs, what he thinks it will do for the economy, he said congressional action will not be necessary in terms of pursuing further tariffs after the Supreme Court's ruling. Does that make you feel irrelevant, Senator?
Well, the president does have other executive authorities he can deploy as relates to tariffs. I spent most of my private sector career of 28 years before coming to Washington in running global operations. I worked for Procter & Gamble for 13 years, had an assignment over in China for 6 of those years. I was in the software business, having offices in both Australia and Japan. So I've spent a lot of time looking at global operations, looking at trade. What the president is doing, he's really confronting some of the uneven playing fields that have been around the world for many, many years. These tariffs are a tremendous means to a better end, and that is confronting high tariff barriers in many countries as well as non-tariff barriers. When you think about it, 95% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. So when we think about the future of agriculture, for beef, for wheat, barley, soybeans, corn, and so forth, as well as other exports of American products, including Boeing aircraft, it's important we've got access to these markets because that really is where the future growth will be for American businesses.
Well, Senator, I'm really glad to have you, and I'm glad that you walked through some of your resume there because your service at Procter & Gamble as well as Right Now Technologies is important to our audience here at Bloomberg TV and radio, and it's why I'd love to hear more from you on the impact of a 15% global tariff that the president says he's pursuing specific to India. I know that you've been an advocate for strengthening U.S.-India trade partnerships, and I wonder if 15% puts a U.S.-India trade deal in jeopardy.
Well, I was just over in Delhi 3 weeks ago. I was, in fact, the new great ambassador, Sergio Gore, who just started his assignment there. I was his first congressional visitor, and I've done business with India for many years. It was very important that we were able to stick the landing between Prime Minister Modi as well as President Trump when they came to agreement on an 18% number. It was about 2 weeks after I came back from Delhi. The India market is incredibly important. The India relationship is incredibly important. India now, of course, is the most populated nation in the world, surpassing China. They're growing at about 7% in their GDP numbers, so it's a big market, big growth, and look at longer-term demographics. It's going to be a very strategic market and partnership for the United States, particularly in a part of the world where we need to pull countries like India and the others on the Pacific Rim close to the United States as we think about broader strategies.
Well, so clearly the president's trade policies have implications for relationships with other countries, India being one. But I'd also like to get into the potential impact here at home. As we know, polling shows us that Americans' perceptions of the economy right now, Senator, are less than stellar under Republican stewardship. I know you are no longer in charge at the NRSC this cycle, at least, but given that you know how difficult it is to look at a map and look to see where you can defend, where you can go on offense, do policies like this make it harder for Republicans to confidently say they can retain the majority in November?
Well, midterms are just always tougher whenever you are the party in power in the White House. That's been the case no matter if it's Democrat or Republican. But face it, we were dealt a tough hand coming off the Biden years with massive inflation. That much of that was caused by the incredibly large stimulus bills, these multi-trillion-dollar stimulus bills that we fought hard against. In fact, Lawrence Summers, Clinton's former Secretary of Treasury, warned Democrats this would be inflationary, and indeed it was. Now we've got inflation, numbers like 2.4%. Definitely inflation has come down, but still stuck with some of these fundamental issues of expensive houses and expensive clothes, expensive groceries. But what are we going to do about that? A couple of things. Number one, President Trump has unleashed certainly more made-in-America energy. We've seen gas prices now the lowest in 5 years. That's an important win for the American people, something you're reminded of usually weekly when you're gassing up your vehicle. Number two, when you address affordability, part of the affordability equation is getting more money in the pockets of the American people. And we've seen that with the working family tax cut bill. It's just now starting to go into effect. These are new tax laws that started in 2026. The average U.S. family is going to see about a $3,700 a year benefit from lower taxes. Of course, that's Social Security, no tax for 90% of seniors on Social Security will be affected by that. The no tax on tips, the no tax on overtime. Those are just some of the benefits that have yet to be realized by the American people. They're going to see more of that as we get close to the election. So affordability is not just reducing prices, but also providing more dollars in the paychecks of the American people to close that gap.
You know, it's interesting when we talk about affordability and the impact that tariffs may or may not have on inflation. And we've seen inflation kind of hanging around this very stubborn spot, a little over 2%, going back to when the president took office. It hasn't really changed a lot in the last year. And when you hear from the likes of Procter & Gamble, aforementioned, expecting tariffs to cost some $400 million after taxes in fiscal 2026, how do you get to that last mile, Senator, to where consumers are more comfortable going to the store?
Yeah, well, it's again, we're encouraged by the reduction we're seeing in energy prices. A really important part of the family budget is what's the price at the gas pump. And again, you're going to see more dollars, net dollars, ending up in the American people's paychecks as these tax cuts kick in. The problem is it's early. You haven't seen that yet kick in is to full extent. That's coming, and I think that'll be part of helping mitigate the high inflation years that we inherited from the Biden administration.
Well, Senator, you've referenced lower gas prices and energy prices overall a few times, and I wonder how much that could be disrupted by what could potentially happen in the Middle East, as the president is openly suggesting if diplomacy does not work, we could see military action in Iran that could threaten to disrupt supply coming out of that region. Senator, do you think that is advisable given what you are saying on how lower energy prices are key to the economic pitch here?
Well, we're in such a different position now than we were many years ago. You go back to the War of Yom Kippur in 1973 when you had Arab countries and the oil embargo. You saw a quadrupling of price of oil. It created massive inflation. A 30-year fixed mortgage back in 1981 was 18.6%. What's true today, though, is that we have decoupled our country from many of the global markets as it relates to oil. We were overly dependent on the Middle East. Today, the United States is the largest producer of oil and oil derivatives in the world, and that helps soften the blows if there is any kind of connectivity going on in Iran. So I'm not as concerned about what happened to oil prices, given the fact that we have done a stellar job, thanks to President Trump and the American energy industry, of becoming much more self-sufficient, and we are now energy dominant. We are an exporter of energy, where once upon a time we were a net importer.
To follow on that, Senator Daines, what should be the trigger for a strike against Iran?
Well, that's a heady question. I'll tell you, the president I know is looking at all options. I've spent a fair amount of time in the Middle East. One thing I do know is you can't trust the current Iranian regime. They are the leading sponsor of terror in the world. This is a regime that preaches death to America. They call the United States the big Satan. They call Israel the little Satan. I don't trust this regime. There's one thing this regime does understand and respect, and that's strength and that's force. So I know there's a lot of variables, a lot of consideration the president has to take into account. But I do not trust the current regime. I was at the Munich Security Conference here a week and a half ago. There were 200,000 Iranians protesting against the current regime in the streets of Munich, Germany. It was an incredible sight. So there's a lot of energy right now to change the regime in Tehran. Most Iranians are pro-West, pro-American, but you've got a regime. They're tyrants, they're brutal. They're going to be hanging students, I understand, here in the next 48 hours who've been protesting. This regime needs to go. The Iranian people need to have the ability to topple that regime. That's not up to the United States to do. That's about the Iranian people. But I know President Trump is playing hardball right now with the Iranian regime, as he should.